With great pleasure, I get to introduce our next speaker, Jason. It's been quite the day. This morning I got to tell him how much I hated him. And we actually just met for the first time during Shayla's exercise, so it's been pretty cool. Jay's doing a lot of work around the university, and just getting to know him through that aspect. He's just this warm, very compassionate being, just always so open and inviting. He speaks with a lot of vulnerability in his messages, and just always something to learn from whatever he has to say.
Sorry.
So without further ado, here's Jason, but before that, we have feedback sheets and just Gary would like just a reminder thrown out to fill those out as we go along. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you. I took my shoes off. So I guess this is the fifth year, and previous 4 years, I got to follow somebody who's not here today, that I think that we should say hi to. So Brian Terrio's not here today, and so just to offer a hello to Brian wherever he's at. So, you know, every year this is a good place for me to come because it offers me an opportunity to get in touch with me. And as I was sitting listening to the rest of the presentations today, it's always very humbling. As a person who continues to work on letting go and just being, it's always been difficult for me, and it always will be. And so there's no enlightened position. And so for me to sit here and listen to everybody else talk, and the old ego pops up as, wow, it'd be nice if I could be as good as them. And so this is like a suicide for myself. You know?
Right in front of us.
That's right. How am I doing so far? Now, no apologies about my swearing. It may come out, and I apologize beforehand. Not really, actually. Okay, so let's get started here. Why not contemplate that possibility for him? And that might be offensive to some people, and that's exactly why I'm doing it. Because it opens up the idea that we can openly talk about suicide and try to not form a prejudice and be completely objective. And so maybe it was the most famous cry for help, but I sort of see it as maybe the most famous cry for transformation. We talk about non-duality, and I don't even know what that word means anymore. You know, it's like, but I know for some people that I've worked with and had the honor to share in this experience, and also be there at the my own cries for help, be them pathetic, honest, or transformational. That's where I was. And that's the topic that we're going to explore. I'm going to use different words for being. I might use the word soul. I'm going to use the word psyche. I'm not going to play around with I, me. I'm just going to talk, and we'll see where it goes. And we'll just see where this leads. So, to be or not to be, is suicide a solution? And for some people, it might be. And who are we to judge? I remember the slide that I didn't put up here that I wanted to, but I forgot. I had an aunt of mine and her husband. It's this real cool picture that I found on Facebook from the 50s when they parked on the railway tracks and essentially were killed. And it was a picture of them leaving the church in the casket, and it was kind of cool, right? And it was kind of sad. So my own history of suicide and that impulse was within the family, but it's in all our beings. We really cannot live unless we actually can ask the question, why can't we die? And maybe we can't live if we actually haven't been there. Willing to actually take that step. I remember in my addictive career, if you will, and this is the pathetic part that I can remember, and I'm okay saying it was pathetic because it was. I remember being living. This is about 1997, and being in my room and being all wounded and caught up in my suffering with a shotgun beside me, my wife pounding on the door, and that wasn't an authentic suicide impulse. That was me being very selfish and pathetic. I can own that now. But equally said, it was a gateway for me to look at it after. And we can go through suicides in many ways. Every day, every moment. I'm in a different space this year, not completely, because I don't know where the hell this is going to go. I got about 30 slides there that I intended to talk about, and fuck, it might not happen. So, where are we lacking? James Hillman really helped me put some of this together. Really resonated with some of his ideas. And you have clients who come in and they flirt with the notion of suicide. Then you have clients who come in and you think, well, this might be it. They might actually leave today and end it. And early into working with people, I would get all paranoid about that. And I would shut down the process for them on the notion of prevention. Like, I can fucking stop somebody from killing themselves. Give me a break. If I had that much power, that'd be great. But that's ridiculous. It doesn't mean that we can't be compassionate. But here, our own psychological death, their brink on the edge allows us to also face our edge, and we do it together. And it's probably the most challenging clients that you can have, in my opinion, and also the most rewarding. But there's this stigma that we have about suicide. Oh my God, it's a sin. I'm going to go to hell. Whatever. You believe that? That's great for you. It's a crime. Seriously? I just killed that ant over there, for Christ's sakes. You know, I should have known, I should have stopped it. It's an antisocial behavior. I remember having this conversation with my wife and my adult children last year about suicide, and they were all against me, and I didn't feel like alone and wounded, but I'm thinking like, why can't we talk about it? What would be, it may happen. And yes, we're going to be affected, but we're affected by each other all the time. Then there's this notion of the therapist. At first, I remember one time not filling out these forms of this client who'd come in. I didn't check to see if there was where the lethality was, where was the availability, and I'm getting all nervous and paranoid. I'm thinking, how shitty of a therapist I am. Because it's almost like they're our charge, right? But when we sit back and we really look at it, I hopefully over the last 5 or 6 years have learned to work with it in a different way. Because it was here before, this personal failure. And so I don't know what to really say about it other than just explore the phenomenon and learn from the people that we sit with, and also have being inform us. And so we're going to see where this leads together. But first, here's a question for you folks. What do folks think about that? What if it's true? I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but what if it is? Does it mean anything? I'm not about glorifying suffering, but for some people, this is the only way that they feel there's an out. I sure wish I could sing that first line of the song. That'd be butchered. That'd be a suicide in itself. So why not suicide? Who gets to decide? Me? You? The agency? Religion? I sure hope not. And can we embrace an unbiased view? Be completely objective? Haven't been able to do that yet. We talk about hopelessness and the pathway through for some folks that might be in that hopelessness. And sometimes I don't stay true to my own despair to allow somebody's being to break through their despair. And these are the things that we're going to get to. But let's take a look at the phenomenology of it first by image, if I'm on the right pace with my slides here. This is not meant to scare anybody or be offensive. It just shows the finality and what it may look like. Oh, I guess I'm ahead of myself. That's the next one. Sorry about that. Suicide all over the place, I'm telling you. So this notion of prevention. Therapy is not about medicine. We're not medical doctors. And from this perspective, is we don't proceed with an attitude of prevention. We don't take away somebody's privilege to be in their pain. We don't become codependent if we can help it. And I'm sure it does arise. But in the spirit of understanding the suicide impulse, understanding where does that impulse arise from, and maybe some of our clients can trace that impulse back to something larger than the person that's experiencing it. That impulse, if you can sit and see how vast and huge and unbelievable it is, you might have a chance to step outside the self. But there's no guarantees. And that can't be a method in of itself, because you're trying to trick your client into saying, it is better some other day, somewhere else. And where do we get off saying that? What's that about? And I've struggled with that in my own practice. And I've been taken to task with that as well with some clients, when they've confronted me basically saying, who the fuck are you telling me that I can't take my life? And they got me. And that's something that I've had to learn and be okay with and respect them for that. Because I would imagine, in some of the stories they've told me, that they've been told they can't think that way. They can't experience that. They can't get into that suffering. That's not there for them. So they're even more alienated from who they are, just experience in of itself. But please, nobody commit suicide in front of us today. Okay? So the confirmation, though, of whatever's going on, you're going to hear potentially some outlandish stories. So I've been working with one client for about 3 or 4 years, and there's been a bit of a shift. But every once in a while, the suicide piece will come up. And it's a vivid image. The last one was, I tried to hang myself with a cord, and I'm going to hide the bruises from you. And in my own mind, knowing this client, I think the story was actually completely fiction, but so what? It meant something. And so trying to understand what that meaning was, to understand that experience. So from this little perspective, I guess, psyche is given precedence over the body. So there's no hiding from the impulse. There's no hiding from the suffering. Equally said, we don't try to pathologize the behavior. In a second or two, I'm going to throw up this list of all these diagnoses these people have. That's just to appear to be academic, I guess. And this is the important one. Feeding our clients' anxiety with our own. Because what we do then is we repress the death energy that's already here. That's in this classroom. It's in my belly. It's in everybody's being. That is the fuel we need for transformation. And if we repress that, the likelihood that they're going to then commit might be greater. I don't know. But then basically, I'm saying no to my experience, and I'm damn well saying no to their experience. And the sharp ones, they pick it up. Maybe not somebody who you've seen for a week or for 2 weeks. For those who you've seen for a couple years, they pick it up. So then we also have to be careful then, and I have a tendency to do this, is to become overly psychodynamic. You're going to see that pretty soon. And then we all of a sudden go from trying to find meaning and look into the suicide impulse, and instead we're starting to categorize, quantify, build these theories. I've tried to stay away from that today, but I've done a little bit of it anyways, unfortunately. But we do not try to degrade the death experience. We give it its full flowering if possible. So I think I've preached enough for the last 5 minutes. Okay, so this is about a 4-minute little video clip. It'll put it in front and center for us. For some people, I guess love is it's hard to trust. In my experience with the clients that we're going to continue to talk about, that was at the crux of them obviously not being able to love themselves, but trusting that I would turn my back on them and not be able to love them, not be able to hold their experiences, and somehow think that they were crazy, or this was evil, or this was bad, when so many people in society, and their family included, have that same ideology. And of course, we don't want to see our own children come home with slashes on their wrists, but it's a reality. So here's a quick little gig. In the last year and a half or so, or maybe a bit longer, I've been working with some of this. So the suffering seems pretty intense, and there's been repeated attempts. And learning to work with that and go with that wherever it takes me. And really it's been a huge learning for myself, and that's what's being taught through suffering. And so my own suffering has, I think, aided in transformation for them, but not always. So this is what we're going to be getting up to. Important piece though, we can't get lost in the diagnostics, because then we're back to all of a sudden, let's prevent. Let's load and go, and we're going to the hospital. We're shutting her down. And if that becomes necessary for somebody's survival, great, but not based on your own paranoia, on your own fear. If you've been into the abyss, and if you've we're going to have numerous psychological deaths, but all of them help. To have somebody sit in their own hopelessness and in that pregnancy of waiting for something to manifest, for something to arise through the suffering. And you all know what I'm talking about here. I'm sure most of us here have been very on the edge, or maybe have attempted your own suicide. But what has been the standard from my education has been just this. It's been prevention and cover your ass. And then actually, I put that in because for you bastards. And then equally being punished when I've tried to facilitate change. And the idea is that, well, you didn't just send them to the hospital? That wasn't just the protocol? My first experience with a suicidal client was, supposedly a borderline young woman, beautiful being. She was about 21. This was in 2001. In the first 5 minutes of being on my practicum, she jumped out of a group and told me she was going to kill herself. I didn't know what the hell to do, other than the fact that I'd been there. And so I listened, I talked to her, I tried to hold her experience, and I didn't tell anybody anything for 3 or 4 hours later, which they weren't too happy about. But I felt that I owed her more than just, oh, I can't deal with that, can't talk to you, this isn't right, you shouldn't be thinking this way, blah, blah, blah. So, within this 5 or 6 clients there, I found sort of like, phenomenologically, 3 sort of types sort of came to my psychodynamic mind. And this was the victim martyr type. And I don't mean that in a negative, derogatory way. But their suicide impulse, yes, it was a cry for help, but equally said the charge of the impact or the energy coming through the psyche, was not enough to really shift an understanding. And it was very much, in my understanding, a direct punishment against those who had been hurtful to this individual. And this is the story. And it was hard to shake him from that. Well, we all died, what's the point? And there's no arguing that, other than exploring what that means. Sometimes in this situation, what has been told to me is that you have the impulse passes, the person may be really inebriated, they find themselves with something hanging around the neck, and they then get really scared, and they then potentially phone 911 or go to the hospital themselves. And you start to work with them, but they don't realize the enormity of the event, in my experience. And so they talk to you about tomorrow, and tomorrow I'll change. It wasn't really that big of a deal. And so like I said earlier, the symbolic power of the suicide was only enough, seemingly, to keep the body alive. And very much revealed the attachment to the body, and then the attachment to others, and all the complaints they had with the others, which we tried to work on. So simply stated, when you get into the meaning of it, this whole world, we've talked about it, Gary talked about it, others talked about it earlier, this projected world. And this projected world has hurt me, maybe severely. And so the only choice that I seem to have is to end it inside here. But there's some levels getting mixed up in that place. And when they were to identify with bodily existence in the physical world, they feel they can end that to end their suffering. And a common question that I'll ask is, how do you know it's not going to get worse? Not to be mean, but an idea to maybe shift an understanding. Because after all, in my opinion, all therapy, whatever it is, are just a bunch of ideas put together in language. So trying to find that symbolic meaning. And for the victim martyr type, I found, is that they have this part of them that they still believe they control the outside world, or the world that they've objectified. And so that part of the world, they still believe they have control over. But that objectified world is also their own objectified self. And so they're killing themselves. And maybe in a final act to teach somebody something. I remember being in grade 12, and I was dating my wife at the time, and we had a bunch of friends, and one of our best friends, boyfriends, as love goes, this relationship didn't end very well because one of them were having an affair. And he come home and hung himself in the garage. Another entryway into suicide. And that suicide, again, is the anger that's out here that then gets all mixed up in here. So when we have that suicide impulse and the person's going to kill their body, I think there's so much stuff going on in their head, they can't see the game. They can't see the play. The players are masked. What role the ego has. The investment in how hurt they are than hurting the other. And this piece here, the energetic charge is not strong enough. There's maybe not enough desperation, if you want to use that word, to actually see that the old pattern is the problem. And we have to die to the old pattern. And so the move is from becoming to being. Because becoming has been the failure. They take it as being a failure as such. And I've been there on numerous occasions. This is going to sound really silly, but I remember taking this industrial first aid up north in BC. It's a 2-week course. And I could pass the theory, but I couldn't pass the practical because I can't bandage jack shit. And it was embarrassing, and I felt just terrible inside. And this is how stuck I was in my own ego. And I remember coming home, and what did I do? Pathetic. So hurt, so worked up, so worried about this because I had to get this to make myself feel something or be somebody. Grabbed the gun, ran outside to the field, started taking off shots. It was pathetic. But when folks come in with the same actions, I can understand to some degree. It's obviously not the same psychodynamics as mine, but I get a sense of it. And so it's trying to get into that and figure out what's going on, to pull that apart, unpack that a little bit. And so maybe we have to have our tantrums. That's okay. I've been spending some time with my recent granddaughter, and I've been learning that working with suicidal clients is kind of working with a baby that's a bit colicky, and the idea of giving them the bottle and trying to figure out the self-soothing aspect. And so as a counselor, where do we find that? Because we want to be able to have our clients self-soothe at the same time they'll be able to confront them. And so when the idea is about death, though, it seems to ups the ante a little bit. So then we have the cynical type that I've seen it as such. I'm not saying this is true. These are just words. Being created is seriously the worst fucking thing ever. I wish I had cancer. So this one client that states this, I'm still working with her, and she's given me more of an education than I could ever bargain for. It's almost like she's channeled every psychodynamic textbook there ever was and throws it in my face. So that's beautiful. And the second quote here, I wish I had cancer, was an individual in their 30s who's going through a gender transition. And the pain is so deep for them that they don't have the complete volition to kill themselves. But they straight up tell me that I wish I got a disease. And they're not bullshitting around. This one client's brother died in the fall, and this individual was jealous. So that they can't make that leap, which is, I guess, great for me. But this is where they can get stuck. So apparently the ego does want help, but only in the sense that if something can happen to me, then that'll be great. And in some ways, back to the suicide impulse. The suicide impulse, from my perspective there, the suicide is against existence and God. They're not so much angry at themselves. I found with this type, it's the idea of God or existence itself has fucked them over, given a really raw deal. And you have to work with that. And that's a tough one. When it becomes so entrenched, that ideology. So this is going to give you a bit of an insight into what I'm talking about with the cynical type.
3 months we've been together, I get nothing from you. Today, what we're into now, do me a courtesy, okay? I'm not trying to convert you.
Look, I'd consider myself a realist, all right? But in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist.
Okay, what's that mean?
Means I'm bad at parties.
Let me tell you, you ain't great outside of parties either.
I think human consciousness was a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law.
That sounds god-fucking awful, Russ.
We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, this accretion of sensory experience and feeling. Programmed with total assurance that we are each somebody, when in fact everybody's nobody.
I wouldn't go around spouting that shit I was you. People around here don't think that way. I don't think that
I
way.
think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction. One last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal.
So, what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning?
I tell myself I bear witness. The real answer is that it's obviously my programming. And I lack the constitution for suicide.
My luck, I picked today to get to know you. 3 months, I don't hear a word from you, and
You asked.
yeah, and now I'm begging you to shut the fuck up.
So you don't mind if he swears, but you got to get offended if I swear, huh? It's interesting that it's almost as if my client, the writers that took that show, channeled this individual. Because this is exactly the entrenchment and the cynicism that this individual will get into. And I actually showed him this clip. And he did one better. He goes, well, I'll show you the clip from The Matrix. I'm thinking, okay, great. So that, I don't know how that worked. But in the sense is that this is the interesting piece. This is going to sound terrible, but the goal of non-duality is no self, absolute reality. Well, the goal for some of these folks is they at least want an ego that they don't have. Or it's very fragile, or it's very fragmented, or there's tons of holes in it. And so that's the issue. So I don't know what's harder. Trying to miraculously rebuild the ego or go the other way. But this is the beauty of the work that I love is the cynical, suicidal type client. Because you'll go to places you'll never imagine. And I'm sure most of us here who are therapists have experienced this. Don't you love the suicide crisis attempt in the last 3 minutes of the session? Don't you just embrace that? Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. So what I call the cynical suicidal type client, it comes back to the work of a psychodynamic theorist named Fairbairn in the 50s. And then an individual named Michael Ballant, even in the 30s and 40s. And he talked about this basic fault. It almost has used that term as well, and he's turned it into a transpersonal, non-dual understanding. So good for him. And I mean that. So the internal saboteur is we're basically working with the most fundamental split that you can have, which is the fundamental split is failure of a two-person relationship. So a failure in the facilitating environment where we can blame the mother, but we're just talking about two people. So it could be grandma, father, brother, I don't care. And essentially, from that perspective, in relationship, we develop self. The egoic self, the constructed self, the self that has memories. And that, for the person who's carrying around the internal saboteur, never happens. Or it happens very, it's short-circuited. And so this idea that you're going to con them out of their suicide by telling them that you love them is pathetic. And they don't have to tell them that you love them. It's the idea, sometimes the relationship isn't enough. So we have to, at first, with some of this, is actually dehypnotize the client and uncover the false self. So theoretically, underneath the false self, there still exists essence. Which makes perfect sense. We come into this universe from somewhere. That, to me, should be our first primary attachment. Now, of course, the infinite does not have the capacity to understand that. But as we continue to get older and individuate, the cosmic self can be our primary attachment to the cosmos, to what is, to this unfolding. That becomes actually the true mirror, the foundation for everything. But when you have the failure at the beginning to even develop the self, or it gets very scary. And so trying to tell somebody who doesn't have that and to just use certain techniques to just make them happier is ridiculous. And so once we at least work with the false self-orientation and actually have them sit in that schizoid feeling, it almost mirrors the feeling of the absolute. They're very similar. We can let free the suicide impulse that's born from the false self, because that lies in the false self and the wrong hopes. It's back to what Gary said. The self-other will not be able to get you anywhere. You can have a comfortable life, but when it comes to this business, we're talking about something fundamentally completely different. And so having a person embrace that slowly. Hope I'm making some sense. Now, this is going to sound completely opposite what I said earlier, but that's the paradox. But not completely. The hospital visit. I've learned that actually to use the hospital visit psychologically, not in prevention, not let's load you up with meds, not that at all. It's to call the bluff and let's see how terrible the hospital piece actually is. So the person can voluntarily, when they need, go there themselves. Because, I mean, I know when I was in my states of absolute panic and terror that lasted for 3 years, there was many times that I would have liked to have gone to the hospital, but I was too ashamed. And I'm pretty happy that I'm sitting here talking to you about this bullshit today. It's great. But I think that if I would have had trust just to do that, to check that out, not to break through that shame barrier. Because then after a while, then you have a little bit of firepower to call the bluff. Because you meet somebody for the first couple times, and they're telling you they're going to kill themselves after you only met them twice in the last 5 minutes of the session, that gets pretty hard. What do you do with that? And as I worked with this one individual, I'd make it an issue to talk about suicide as soon as they came in. Straight up, when I knew that that was always on their mind. Because at first, I was trying to talk them out of their suicide. And they would call me on it immediately. Because I wanted to save them. I wanted them not to die. They needed to die. Not physically, but even then, that's not my place, that's not my call. It appears to be society's call, though. So we talk about the window of tolerance and the transformative energies, and the reason why the hospital visit can be transformative is because that's a way that an individual can also increase the window of tolerance. I had a client of mine who just recently, living in Tabor, they took themselves to the hospital in Tabor. And I went and visited them there. It was a good time. And about 2 months later, when things got rocky again, they went back again. And it wasn't about hooking up on medication and getting so lost in the meds. It was about, this is a safe place for me, and we can continue to do the work. And then they would be easier for them to come in and show me the slashes on their wrists. And then I wouldn't have to get so afraid and like to turn my eyes.
Jason?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the window of tolerance.
How much can a person actually continue to process and take? And so when I first started working on my issues, there was only so much that I could reveal, that I could share, and so much trauma that I could experience and put out there and actually experience in my body. And as we continue to process and continue to unfold, that increases, and I can go deeper and I can go deeper. The trick is, though, here I've also found that we can't get lost there. We can't get afraid, because sometimes people are going to put themselves into a place in a second that no warning. And no amount of grounding is going to change that. And so equally said, we can't be afraid to necessarily box somebody in just because there is a trauma there. I had a client recently who went into crisis and was told that his childhood sexual abuse was the foundational problem, and no wonder they didn't use the word screwed up, but no wonder it's so bad for you. And in 3 sessions, I mean, it was lucky, this doesn't happen very often, we deconstructed that pretty fast. Because that was the story he was hanging on to. And that's not going to happen with everybody, but everybody's an individual case. And so that's why everybody's suicide and the impulse is different, in my opinion. So the seed of whatever comes lies in the waiting. And Hillman talked about this in the sense of utter despair and complete hopelessness, but not as a technique. So that can take some time or maybe no time. But if it's a technique we're going to use to convince somebody, again, that we don't want them to commit suicide, again, that's our agenda. And it's subtle countertransference.
Hate me today. Hate me tomorrow. Hate me for all the things I didn't do for you.
This is a beautiful piece. Preventing nowhere, we make possible the client's experience of death. And another way, preventing nowhere, we finally maybe give them the chance for them to be exactly who they are, without society, their parents, anybody telling them otherwise, maybe for the first time. And everybody here has experienced that for themselves. When you are fundamentally allowed to be exactly who you are. And the first 3 presentations to me totally informed me of that. Of the doubt that I get into my own head about this is wrong, this is right. So having room for ourselves, despair within ourselves, and to honor our own despair. And so from the psychodynamic perspective, they talk about the hate and the transference, and it's about the clients transferring this stuff onto you, and they're projecting things onto you. But if we twist it a little bit different, the projection's a little bit different. The projection is they're telling you, you're not letting me have my despair. They're not borderline transferring you about that you're terrible, you're this, you're that. The projection's a bit different. They're saying, this is my despair. Let's build this vessel of despair together. And in this place, something may change. The deepest beauty that I've experienced is in my deepest despair. And I always, for the first few years of working on stuff, I always forsaken that in myself. And as I allowed room for that, we've talked about that lots today, things then did change completely by themselves. And like stated earlier, it had nothing to do with me. And then we can withdraw the projection. And like we say time and time again, the moment then becomes just as it is.
So is that when you're just sitting with the client and basically feeling the complete despair and hopelessness of the entire situation?
Maybe over and over and
Not
over.
judging it?
Yeah, maybe over and over and over again.
But not judging it?
Not judging it, but not even realizing that's actually even what you're doing.
Oh,
So it
okay.
doesn't become a method.
Oh, okay.
Or another new technique to like fix somebody, take something away. So essentially, if there's such a cure, it's in the symptom, right?
In the cure is the symptom?
Yeah. Stated simply. Oh no, I'm pushing time. Can I take 10 more minutes? So it's beautiful when clients can get this. Then you can celebrate. It's grist for the mill. The breakthrough is necessary for the transformation. And it could be how many breakdowns? Who knows? Who's counting? The drift. So the impulse to die doesn't need to be seen anti-life. It is completely necessary. From the transformative type, the ego has been cracked, and there's a sense that a demand with the encounter with the ultimate reality, apart from our projections. Whether that happens or not for people, it happens or it doesn't happen. So as we move down into the transformative type, and as I become more comfortable with the suicidal impulse, we can welcome it comfortably. We become an arbiter of fate. There's some work done when we talk about the soul's code or the soul's destiny, that maybe this has been put into our hands in a past life before we were born. And so this could be somebody's destiny. Who am I to say? But in the language of non-duality, death is necessary for rebirth. There is no question about that. So why with suicide then do we see it differently? Because it's not different. It's just in your face, and you can't run and hide. Or you can. So, validating vulnerability, acknowledge the purity of despair, and honor it. So I got about 8 minutes left here, so I want to look into a little bit of dream material. I've been honored to have this client recently who's at one time was a child soldier for 5 years. And this is one of his experiences. And so what he's doing, he's reporting on an experience, but he's also then reporting on his experience via a dream. And if you give me 5 more minutes of your time, we'll quickly investigate that.
It was both hot and wet in the jungle. We had been on a hunt for about 3 days. One late afternoon, we stopped for a rest. I guess I fell asleep. I was startled awake by gunfire. There must have been a sniper in the trees. We had been ambushed. Shots were popping off, and I saw 2 of my friends, and they got hit. I feel trapped in my dreams. I see the blood in slow motion. My one friend goes down, and then another. My heart starts pounding, and I try to get up and run, but I can't. Fear comes over me. My heart pounds harder, and I feel like someone is pushing me to the ground, holding me down, but no one is there. Any minute now. I want to get up. I try. I want to wake up, but I can't. I don't know how much longer I can stand these dreams. Memories. I feel guilty, but it doesn't go away. These dreams. Soldiers, we feel guilty. Killing is killing, but people don't understand that. And sometimes I feel like a serial killer. I haven't been scared of anything in my life until now. I often think about ending it, but then I can't leave my daughter. If she wasn't here, I wouldn't be here.
So a couple things related to that. Guilt can be a killer with suicidal clients. We need to be able to open up to that guilt fully. I just lost my train of thought. It's okay. We can't use the same weapons to transform with the same theme of how we were wounded. So this individual that the teaching has been beautiful from is trying to teach him that he has to lay down his gun. The skills of the warrior as a soldier become different skills needed to transform, to heal, to surrender, to let go. And that's learning to die. So I want everybody to close their eyes for a second. I want you to picture that you are that soldier, that you have done those killings. I'm going to relax into that. If anybody's feeling nervous or anxious, just push your feet on the floor, feel your body in your chair, and just get settled. Just relax. You are that soldier in that jungle, and you are having that repeated dream. Just relax. Now breathing in, becoming aware of your breath. I want you to visualize the number 1. Hold your breath. And breathe out. Good. Breathing in, visualize the number 2. And breathe out. Good. Breathing in, visualize the number 3. And breathe out. Good. Staying relaxed. I want you now to picture that you're lying on the floor of the jungle and bullets are whizzing by and your life is about to end. Remember, you're in a dream and you're paranoid and you can't get up, but you want to get up and run. Today you're going to surrender and you're going to die. And you're going to take that bullet and you're going to let go. I count 1, 2, 3. You're hit. It's okay, let go. Don't fight the dream. You're the maker. You can surrender. Don't fight. Let go. You can open your eyes. The dreamer is the creator of his dream. And in the dream, he can die. And then symbolically, he can learn to die in the present moment. And lower his anxiety and his panic. And just be. So I'm going to leave you with one last little piece. This is nothing profound. It's actually very simple. It doesn't have much to do with awakening either. This is a email I got from my client who was moving from what I would consider from the cynical type to the transformative type. I fucking hate them, parents. At times I want to just grab a knife and ram it in my fucking chest. No, obviously I won't. Even my friends have pointed out this oddity. They say how different I am when my parents are gone, how stable, confident, competent, and useful I am when they're gone. So things are changing slowly. This individual has all the capacity he did 3 or 4 years ago to kill himself. And it's seemingly by living in despair, me allowing hopelessness in and not trying to take him out of hopelessness, there's been a shift. And I guess that's beautiful. It's a byproduct. And so we're going to continue the journey together. But something is shifting. and even subtly. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Okay, folks?